I never thought a trip to pick up a prescription refill would be the moment that saved my life. But when the pharmacist at Walgreens asked me to step away from the counter and speak with her privately, something in the way she lowered her voice made the back of my neck go cold. I didn't know it yet, but in about 30 seconds, she was going to say something that would unravel 7 years of what I believed was the happiest chapter of my life. My name is Thomas Harding. I'm 62 years old, a retired high school principal from just outside Portland, Oregon. I'd spent 31 years shaping other people's children, which left me very little time to pay attention to what was quietly happening inside my own home. My first wife, Ellen, died of ovarian cancer 6 years before I met Carol. We'd been together since our junior year of college, which meant I lost her after 34 years of building a life side by side. When she passed, I didn't so much grieve as dissolve. Our son Daniel, who was 31 at the time and living in Seattle, called every single day for the first year. He flew down most weekends. He was the only reason I kept any kind of structure to my days. It took me a long time to feel like a functioning person again. I retired 2 years after Ellen died, partly because the job had stopped feeling meaningful without someone to come home and talk about it with, and partly because I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't touch. I started volunteering at the Multnomah County Library, helping run a literacy program for adults. That was where I met Carol. She was 52 at the time, a real estate agent who'd moved to Portland from Scottsdale after a divorce she described as quietly devastating. She had dark blonde hair, reading glasses she was always misplacing, and a laugh that filled whatever room she was in. She volunteered on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the same shifts as me. We started getting coffee after sessions, then dinners. Then she came to a Blazers game with me and Daniel when Daniel visited in November. Daniel was polite to her, attentive in that careful way adult children are when they're reserving judgment. On the drive home after that game, while Carol was in the restroom at the restaurant, he said, "She seems nice, Dad. I just want to make sure you're taking your time." I told him I was. I wasn't. Carol and I were engaged 11 months after we met and married 4 months after that. I was 57. She was 53. I was aware we were moving quickly, but at that point in life, you've already learned that time doesn't expand to accommodate hesitation. Daniel came to the wedding, stood beside me, and gave a toast that was warm and careful, and said everything a son says when he loves his father and isn't quite sure about the woman his father is marrying. The first 2 years were good. Carol moved into the house Ellen and I had bought back in the 90s, a 3-bedroom craftsman in the West Hills with a garden Ellen had spent 15 years getting right. I'd worried the house might feel like living inside someone else's history, but Carol handled it the way she handled most things, with practical grace. She suggested we redo the master bedroom together and leave Ellen's garden exactly as it was, because it was beautiful and it would be a shame to change it. I appreciated that more than I could say. Then, about 2 years into the marriage, I started waking up at night with my heart pounding. Not racing exactly, more like stuttering, and a rhythmic flutter that would last 30 seconds and then stop. I'd lie in the dark, waiting for it to happen again, and eventually fall back asleep, telling myself it was anxiety or too much coffee. The fatigue came next, a deep, leaden exhaustion that didn't respond to sleep. I'd wake up after 8 hours, feeling like I'd been awake for 3 days. Some afternoons I'd sit in my reading chair and lose an hour without meaning to. My appetite dropped. I started losing weight without trying. Carol noticed before I did that I was declining. She came with me to my first appointment with my doctor, Dr. Raymond Solis, and sat in the corner taking notes on her phone while he examined me. He ran an EKG, drew blood, asked about stress and diet. The EKG showed something he called mild irregularity. Not alarming, he said, but worth monitoring. He adjusted my blood pressure medication and suggested I cut back on alcohol and salt. Carol started making me herbal teas in the evenings, a blend she ordered from some wellness supplier she'd found online, something with hawthorn and valerian, and a few other things she said were good for heart health. She'd bring it to me in the living room while I was reading, set it on the table beside me without a word, the way you do for someone you're taking care of. I drank it every night without question because she was trying to help, because that's what I believed she was doing. The heart palpitations continued. Dr. Solis referred me to a cardiologist, Dr. Patricia Huang, who ran a stress test and a Holter monitor study. She said my heart showed signs of what she called early-stage rhythm irregularities and adjusted my medications. She seemed mildly puzzled, that I wasn't improving the way she expected. I went back every 2 months. Each time, she'd look at my blood work with a slight frown and say things like, "Your digoxin levels are a little high. Let's watch that and adjust the dosage downward." Each time, I'd improve slightly, then worsen again. I started having episodes of dizziness. Twice, I nearly blacked out standing up too fast. My vision would go gray at the edges for a few seconds. I stopped driving on the highway because I didn't trust myself. Daniel called every Sunday, as he had since his mother died. About a year into my symptoms, his tone started shifting. He asked more detailed questions about my medications, about what I was eating, about how I was sleeping. I put it down to a son's natural worry. "Are you keeping track of when the palpitations happen?" he asked one Sunday. "Like, what time of day? After meals? Before bed?" I hadn't been. I told him they were worse at night, usually a couple of hours after dinner. "After that tea she makes you?" I paused. "I suppose. Roughly." "Why?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I'm not saying anything, Dad. I just think it would be worth tracking." I dismissed it. Daniel didn't dislike Carol, but there was always that slight distance between them, the polite, careful gap of a son who hadn't fully let the new person in. I thought his question was the product of protective instinct rather than genuine concern. The prescription that changed everything was a refill for my digoxin. My cardiologist had me on a low dose, 0.125 milligrams daily, carefully calibrated because digoxin has what doctors call a narrow therapeutic window, meaning the difference between the right amount and a dangerous amount is not large. She monitored my levels closely. Every time I went in, she expressed mild frustration that my levels were higher than they should have been given the dose she'd prescribed. Carol had started handling most of our pharmacy runs. She was driving more since my dizziness episodes, and she'd offered to take over errands as a practical matter. I'd given her my pharmacy account information so she could manage refills. She was organized that way, better with logistics than I was. But on this particular Tuesday in March, Carol had an afternoon showing, and I happened to be near the Walgreens on Burnside, so I stopped in to pick up my refill myself. The pharmacist, a woman named Angela Reyes, according to her name tag, in her late 30s with reading glasses, pushed up on her head, pulled up my account, and then went very still. "Mr. Harding," she said, "would you mind stepping to the end of the counter for a moment?" I followed her to a small consultation window away from the other customers. "I'm looking at your prescription history," she said carefully. "Your cardiologist has you on 0.125 milligrams of digoxin daily. That's what's in your file." She paused. "But your refill history shows you've been picking up the 0.2 to 5 milligram tablets, twice the prescribed dose, for about 14 months. I stared at her. "That can't be right." "I take what my doctor prescribes. The prescription in your file is for the lower dose." She turned the screen slightly so I could see it. "But the refills that have been picked up have consistently been the higher dose. I don't know if there was a communication error somewhere, but I wanted to flag it because at the dose you've apparently been taking, it would explain a lot of the symptoms listed in your patient notes. Heart irregularities, fatigue, dizziness. Who picked up those refills?" She glanced at the screen. "Your wife." Same account. The pharmacy felt very far away suddenly. The sounds of the store, the muzak, the beeping of a register somewhere. All of it receded. "Is there any chance of a mistake? A data entry error?" Angela Reyes's expression was sympathetic but clear. "I'd strongly recommend you speak with Dr. Huang today. Not later in the week, today. And Mr. Harding, I want to be honest with you. What I'm looking at is concerning enough that I think it warrants a conversation with her about whether this was accidental." I drove home slowly and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes before going inside. Carol wasn't home. She had 2 showings that afternoon and a client dinner in the evening. She'd texted me a heart emoji at noon and asked if I wanted her to pick up Thai food on the way back. I had not yet responded. I called Dr. Huang's office from the driveway. Her nurse put me through after I explained what the pharmacist had told me. Dr. Huang came on the line, sounding sharper than I'd ever heard her. "Come in tomorrow morning at 8. And Mr. Harding, I want you to bring every medication and supplement you're currently taking. Everything. Including anything your wife gave you. Everything." I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I did something I had never done before. I went into Carol's home office. She used the second bedroom as a workspace. She'd set it up efficiently. A long desk, 2 monitors, filing cabinets, a whiteboard with property listings. The door was never locked. I'd never had any reason to go in without being invited. The filing cabinet nearest the door was unlocked. I started pulling folders. Insurance documents, property listings, client correspondence. Nothing unusual. Then, in the back of the bottom drawer behind a hanging folder labeled medical, I found a manila envelope I didn't recognize. Inside was a life insurance policy. My name was on it as the insured. Carol's name was on it as the sole beneficiary. The coverage amount was $1.8 million. The policy had been taken out 3 years ago. I did not remember signing anything like this. I kept looking. Behind the envelope was a smaller folder with a name I didn't recognize, Deanna Harwick. Inside were bank statements for an account I'd never seen, opened at a credit union in Scottsdale with a balance just over $190,000. The account was in Carol's name, but the address at the top was one in Arizona I didn't recognize. I took photos of everything with my phone. Then I replaced the folders exactly as I'd found them. I made myself eat dinner, or pretend to. When Carol came home at 8, carrying Thai takeout in a paper bag, she kissed me on the cheek and talked about her client dinner with easy fluency. I watched her the way you watch a stage performance when you're no longer quite believing in it, noticing the mechanics. "You're quiet," she said. "Just tired. How was your afternoon?" "I stopped at Walgreens," I said, watching her face. "For my refill." Something crossed her expression so quickly I almost missed it. A fraction of a second of something that wasn't surprise but was working to look like it. "Oh? Did everything come through okay?" There was a question about my dosage. I kept my voice even. "They're getting it sorted out. These pharmacies are so disorganized." She shook her head and dished rice onto my plate. "I've had to correct errors twice in the last year." I nodded. I ate a few bites. I said I was tired and went to bed early. I lay in the dark and thought about the fact that the woman lying asleep beside me had been giving me twice my prescribed heart medication for over a year while I'd been getting dizzy and blacking out and slowly deteriorating, and she'd watched all of it with apparent concern, bringing me herbal teas, and holding my arm on stairs, and sitting in doctors' offices, taking notes on her phone. At 11 that night, I texted Daniel, "Can you call me? Not Sunday. Now, if you're awake." His call came in 40 seconds. I told him everything. The pharmacist, the policy I didn't sign, the account in Arizona under a name I didn't know. He was silent for long enough that I said, "Daniel? Dad?" His voice was tight. "When did the heart problems start?" "Roughly," I thought back. "Maybe 2 years into the marriage. A little less. And she started making you that tea around the same time?" "Around then? Yes. Dad, I need you to go to a different doctor. Not Dr. Solis, not Dr. Huang. Someone Carol doesn't know. Go tomorrow before your appointment with Huang. Get a full toxicology panel, and don't tell Carol you're doing it. You think she's been putting something in the tea. I think you've been getting sicker for 3 years while she holds your arm and takes you to doctor appointments. I think there's a life insurance policy in her desk you didn't sign. And I think she's been picking up double your heart medication for 14 months. His voice broke slightly at the end. "Dad, I think she's been trying to kill you slowly enough that it looks like your heart just gave out." The words sat in the room with me, perfectly still. I did not sleep that night. In the morning, Carol made me my tea and set it on the table beside my breakfast plate, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder as she passed. After she left for work, I poured the tea down the sink. I did the same with the herbal tea packets in the cabinet, photographed them first, then disposed of them. I drove to an urgent care clinic in Beaverton, far from our neighborhood, and asked for a comprehensive blood panel. I told the doctor, a young man named Dr. Kevin Park, everything. My symptoms, my cardiologist's concern about my digoxin levels, the pharmacist's discovery. He listened without interruption and then ordered a full toxicology screen including heavy metals, drug levels, and a specific panel for cardiac glycosides. "If someone has been giving you supplemental digoxin in addition to your prescribed dose," he said, "we should be able to confirm that. Digoxin has a relatively long half-life. It won't clear your system quickly." He would call me within 4-8 hours. I drove to my 8 o'clock with Dr. Huang and brought everything. My prescription bottles, the herbal tea packets I'd photographed, printouts of my pharmacy refill history that Angela Reyes had helped me obtain the evening before. Dr. Huang spread them on her desk and was quiet for a long time. "Mr. Harding," she said finally, If you've been taking twice your prescribed dose consistently for 14 months, it explains everything I've been unable to understand about your case. Your symptoms, your blood work, the fact that your levels keep rebounding after we lower your dose." She paused. "I want to be very direct with you. Chronic digoxin toxicity at the level you may have been experiencing is serious. It can cause exactly what you've been living through. It can also, if continued, cause fatal arrhythmia, an event that would look, on a cardiac history like yours, entirely natural." She had already picked up her phone before she finished the sentence. "I spent the next 3 hours in a small conference room at the cardiology practice, talking to a woman named Detective Lisa Carver from the Portland Police Bureau. She was in her mid-40s, methodical and calm, and she wrote down everything I said in a small notebook without apparent reaction. I showed her the photos I'd taken in Carol's office. She looked at them for a long time. "The policy in that photo," she said. "Do you know if you signed it?" "I have no memory of signing anything like it. We have a shared financial advisor and I handle my own accounts. I would remember. Forgeries in this context are not unusual," she said. "We'll need access to the original document." "There's something else," I said. "The name on the Arizona account. Deanna Harwick." I've never heard Carol mention that name. Detective Carver's pen paused. "Can you spell that for me?" I did. She wrote it down and underlined it once. Daniel arrived from Seattle that evening. He drove 4 hours straight after I called him and pulled into my driveway at 7 p.m. looking like he hadn't breathed since the night before. We sat in the kitchen, and I made coffee and he didn't say much. He just kept looking at me the way he'd looked at me after his mother died, like he was checking that I was still there. Carol came home at 8:30. She came into the kitchen, saw Daniel, and her expression did something complicated before settling into pleasant surprise. "Daniel, I didn't know you were coming down." "Spontaneous trip," he said. "How nice." She set down her bag. "Should I make dinner?" "We ate already," I said. "But sit down. I want to talk to you about something." She sat. She was very good at sitting with composure. Her hands were folded on the table, and her eyes moved between Daniel and me with an expression of mild, open curiosity. "I went to pick up my own prescription yesterday," I said. "The pharmacist pointed out that I've been on twice my prescribed dose for over a year." "What?" Her face arranged itself into concern. "That's a serious error. We need to call them." "She said you picked up the refills." A pause. "I may have picked up the wrong strength once. I didn't realize." "For 14 months? Her jaw tightened slightly. "Thomas, I don't understand what you're implying." "I went into your office." The stillness that moved across her face was not the stillness of hurt or surprise. It was the stillness of calculation. I had seen it in students for 30 years, that half-second pause when someone is deciding what story to tell. "You went through my private things. I found an insurance policy with my name on it. $1.8 million. I don't remember signing it. Our financial advisor suggested." "I called our financial advisor this morning. He has no knowledge of that policy." Daniel, who had been sitting very quietly, said, "Who is Deanna Harwick?" The name landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. Carol's face went briefly, completely blank before the performance resumed. Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe you've been going through my personal documents. After everything I've done to take care of you." "Who is Deanna Harwick?" I repeated. "She's no one. A client from years ago. The account is a professional matter. In your name, at an address you've never mentioned to me, with $190,000 in it." Her tears stopped. The shift was so abrupt it was almost clinical. "I think you need to get some rest, Thomas. You've been confused and paranoid for months now." "Doctor, Solis has been concerned about cognitive—" "I stopped drinking your tea 4 days ago. I kept my voice level, and I felt clearer than I have in 2 years." Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear exactly. Something colder than fear. "I'd like you to leave tonight," I said. "Both of us would." She stood slowly. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe." She took her bag and walked upstairs. Daniel and I sat in the kitchen, in silence. 20 minutes later, we heard her come back down, heard the front door open and close, heard her car back out of the driveway. Daniel let out a long breath. He put his hand on mine on the table. Neither of us said anything. The toxicology results came back the following afternoon. Dr. Park called me while Daniel and I were having lunch. He didn't begin with a greeting. "Mr. Harding, Your digoxin levels are consistent with someone taking significantly more than their prescribed therapeutic dose over an extended period. Additionally, we found elevated levels of a compound called oleandrin in your blood. I don't know what that is. It comes from oleander, the plant. It acts on the heart in a manner very similar to digoxin. In combination with excess digoxin, the effect on cardiac rhythm can be severe. Mr. Harding, this combination, at the levels we're seeing, is not accidental exposure. I've already contacted the police. Oleander. I thought about the herbal tea packets Carol had ordered from her wellness supplier. I thought about the garden Ellen had spent 15 years perfecting, the one Carol had said was too beautiful to change. Oleander grew in that garden. Along the back fence, a full hedge of it, pink flowers. Ellen had always warned me not to let it grow near the vegetable beds. Carol had made me tea from what grew in our own garden, in plain sight. For 2 years, Detective Carver and her partner arrived at my house within 2 hours. I let them into the garden. There was a gap in the oleander hedge I hadn't noticed before. Several branches recently cut, the cuts fresh enough that the wounds in the wood hadn't fully dried. The investigation that followed moved faster than I expected and uncovered things I hadn't known to look for. The life insurance policy had been executed using a combination of digital manipulation software and documents I'd legitimately signed. My will, a mortgage refinancing from 3 years ago. The signature was close enough that it had passed initial review. The name Deanna Harwick turned out to be Carol's legal name before she changed it. She'd changed it 8 years ago, 2 years before I met her, in Maricopa County, Arizona. Before she was Carol Whitmore, she was Deanna Harwick, twice widowed. Her first husband, a man named Glenn Harwick, had died of what was ruled a cardiac event at 61. He had no prior heart disease. His family had raised concerns at the time that were not formally investigated. Her second husband, a retired dentist named Warren Chu in Scottsdale, had died 18 months after their wedding of what was attributed to congestive heart failure. He had been 64. He had been healthy by all accounts until the year of his marriage to Deanna. Both men had significant life insurance policies. Both men's deaths had occurred within 2 years of marriage. Both men were financially stable, recently widowed, and had adult children who expressed unease about the relationship. Detective Carver walked me through this in my living room, Daniel sitting beside me with his hand on my arm. I looked at the timeline she'd laid out on paper. 2 men, then a name change, then me. Why the name change between marriages? I asked. Warren Chu's family had hired a private investigator after his death, Detective Carver said. That investigator connected the pattern between Glenn Harwick and Warren Chu and was beginning to build a case. Deanna Harwick became Carol Whitmore, moved to Portland, and started over. She knew someone was looking. She knew. And she had 3 years before the investigator's family eventually dropped the case for financial reasons. I thought about the library. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, her laugh filling the room, 2 hours of conversation about things that mattered to me, after which I'd felt seen for the first time in years. I tried to calculate how long she had been cultivating that before the Tuesday we met. Whether she'd been there longer than I knew, watching, selecting. How long had she been volunteering there before I started? I asked. Detective Carver looked at her notes. About 4 months. Daniel made a sound I recognized from when his mother died. Carol, or Deanna, was arrested at a hotel in Lake Oswego, where she'd checked in 2 nights earlier. She'd apparently anticipated something was coming and had not fled far. The prosecutor later told me that experienced confidence was part of her pattern. She didn't believe she'd been caught. Not fully. Not until the arraignment. I sat through the preliminary hearings, but not the full trial. My cardiologist advised against the stress, and Daniel agreed. I watched the verdict on television in Daniel's apartment in Seattle, where I'd been staying for 3 months. Guilty on charges of attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and 2 counts of insurance fraud. The charges related to her previous husbands were under active investigation in Arizona. She was sentenced to 22 years. In the news footage outside the courthouse, she looked the same as she always had. Composed, well-dressed, her expression arranged into something that resembled dignity. I looked at her face on the screen and tried to find the woman I'd had coffee with after library sessions, the woman who'd laughed at things I said, and I couldn't locate her anywhere in that face. Daniel turned off the television and handed me a cup of coffee. "It's over," he said. I knew it wasn't over. Not in the way he meant. The physical recovery took months. My cardiologist spent the better part of a year carefully recalibrating my medications, monitoring my cardiac function, watching the damage slowly stabilize. She told me bluntly that another 3 to 4 months of what I'd been taking would have caused irreversible damage. 6 months might have killed me in a way that looked perfectly natural on my chart. The other recovery was harder to track and slower to arrive. I went back to Portland eventually, to my house, Ellen's house. I stood in the garden for a long time the first day back. The oleander hedge was gone, removed by a landscaper while I was in Seattle. In its place was a long bed of bare soil. I stood looking at it and thought about planting something there. I hadn't decided what yet. Therapy helped. I found a counselor who specialized in what she called elder financial abuse and intimate partner manipulation, which I learned was not uncommon. She had a list on her wall of the methods people like Carol use, and I recognized every single one from my own marriage. The attentiveness at the beginning, the gradual positioning as primary caregiver, the subtle undermining of other relationships, Daniel's quiet worry framed as overprotectiveness. My own doctors managed through accompaniment, through note-taking, through the gentle steering of conversations. There's a term for what she did with the medications and the tea and the progressive worsening of my health. Slow poisoning designed to look like natural decline. There's another term for the way she'd framed my increasing confusion and fatigue as evidence that I was deteriorating, that I needed her, that I couldn't manage without her help. Gaslighting, though I resist the clinical tidiness of the word because what it actually felt like was much more gradual and intimate than any single term captures. It felt like reality becoming unreliable, like standing on ground you've trusted your whole life and noticing, too slowly, that it has been quietly giving way. What I know now, that I wish I had known then, is this. The people who prey on the bereaved and the lonely are patient in a way that doesn't feel threatening because patience looks like attentiveness. They choose well. They select people who are financially stable and socially isolated and accustomed to trusting a partner completely. They are good at appearing to love you because appearing to love you is the mechanism, not the aberration. And they count on the fact that you will not investigate what you believe in. I learned to listen to my son, not because he was right about everything from the beginning, but because he was paying attention when I wasn't. His discomfort, which I had interpreted as the natural friction of a child adjusting to a parent's new relationship, turned out to be information. He was noticing things he couldn't fully articulate yet. I dismissed that as sentiment, and it almost cost me everything. I also learned that strangers in unremarkable circumstances can save your life. A pharmacist at a Walgreens counter who noticed a number that didn't match, who took the time to step away from the register and say something careful and honest to a man she'd never seen before. I've thought about Angela Reyes many times since. I went back to that pharmacy eventually and asked to speak with her. She came out from behind the counter, and I shook her hand and told her what had happened. She seemed genuinely startled. She said she almost didn't say anything, that she'd hesitated, that it felt intrusive to question someone else's prescription management. I'm glad she didn't let that hesitation stop her. I'm writing this because I want other people who are where I was to recognize something in what I've described. Not the dramatic parts, not the poisoning, or the investigation, or the verdict. Those parts are specific to me. What I want you to recognize is the earlier part. The slow surrender of oversight. The reasonableness of each individual step. The way care and control can be made to look identical when you're standing inside them. If your health is worsening in ways that resist explanation, pay attention. If someone in your life has gradually become your primary point of contact with medical care, with finances, with daily logistics, pay attention. If the people who knew you before express worry that you can't quite account for, please listen to them. Not because they're always right, but because love and history give people a kind of vision that proximity can take away. Daniel still worries. He calls more than once a week now. He drove down last month and we spent a Saturday in the garden together, putting in a new bed where the oleander used to be. We planted lavender and rosemary and a climbing rose Ellen had always wanted along the back fence but never got around to. He didn't say much while we worked. We've gotten comfortable with quiet, the two of us. That's something grief teaches you, if you let it, how to be present with someone without filling every silence. At one point he stopped and leaned on his shovel and looked at me with his mother's eyes, the exact shade, a thing that still catches me off guard after all these years. "You look better, Dad," he said. "I feel better," I said, and meant it. The garden looks different now. Smaller without the hedge, more open, more light reaching the back corners. Some evenings I sit on the porch steps and watch the late sun move across it and think about how much I didn't see when I was sick, how muted everything had become, and how color and clarity returned so gradually I barely noticed until one morning I realized I was simply here again, present and awake and paying attention. I'm still learning how to trust. It's slower work than recovering from poison and less linear, but I'm here to do it. That's the thing I didn't expect to feel as strongly as I do. Not gratitude exactly, though that's part of it. More like a stubborn, quiet insistence on being present for whatever time I have left. Every ordinary afternoon is something I almost didn't have. I don't let myself forget that. I'm still here,